Hello, and welcome to Dodging Bullets, the insolvency practitioner's guide to surviving the week. Today, the topic is a slight move away from focusing purely on insolvency matters, and instead is to look at some of the issues that can arise when working in a professional role and where one's children have additional needs. Joining us this week, we have Charlotte Cook, who is a barrister at South Square, Emma Goodson, who is working in Civil Works Alliance delivery program at Sizewell C and also has the fortune or otherwise to be married to myself. And with me are Steve and Frank. I think to start with, let's say, Charlotte, why don't you give us a brief introduction to your children and how the additional needs arose?
Sure. So I have three children. I have twins who are now 8 and a 6-year-old, all girls. One of my twins has a genetic condition called Prader-Willi syndrome that we didn't know about before she was born. When she was born, she was quite unwell, and initially they thought it might be a sort of infection. But when she didn't get better after a period of time, it became apparent that it was something more serious than that. So they did various tests, and she was in the neonatal intensive care unit for a few weeks and diagnosed when she was, I think, 3 weeks old. And so that sort of changed the course of our lives a bit. It all feels a very long time ago now, thinking about that. But yeah, that's how this sort of path started for us.
And Emma?
So obviously, as you know, Andrew, being my husband, we have 2 children. We have William, who is 9.5, and we have a younger son, Eli, who is coming up 7. For us, I would say not a relatively normal pregnancy. I was in and out of hospital with problems, which looking back now, we could probably attribute to his condition. He was unwell from birth still as well. He went into hospital, I think, the first time at 10 days old with a few different conditions that didn't seem to be too serious at the time. But problems still carried on. He wasn't meeting his milestones. He had some funny body movements. Squint developed. He struggled with feeding. He couldn't sleep, cried a lot, very much so if I remember. And basically he was in and out of hospital a lot, which they attributed to something which was called laryngomalacia, which is a floppy respiratory system, basically. But I knew something else wasn't right and wouldn't take no for an answer. We went private. We went to see a GI team privately, and we got a private referral for a neurologist because they agreed with me that his movements weren't normal. And then I think he was about 7.5 months old, I always remember, because it was the London Marathon day when we were watching the telly, and he had a seizure which lasted 3.5 hours, a tonic-clonic convulsive seizure. So it was obviously blue lighted to hospital. We did various tests. I remember distinctly saying to you, Andrew, I hope it's just epilepsy, which actually, looking back with hindsight, I had no idea about the complexities of epilepsy. So that was really not my experience. So I'm horrified at myself for even saying that. And then I think it was your first Father's Day when William went into hospital again. I think it was quite frequent at this point. And sadly that day he ended up in intensive care on life support for the seizures, and they expedited his genetic tests. But I'd done some homework in between, and I had already concluded myself that he had this rare neurogenetic condition called Angelman syndrome, which bizarrely is similar to some of the symptoms of Prader-Willi because it's on the same chromosome, but the maternal side rather than the paternal side. It's just the symptoms manifest differently because it's a slightly different gene that's deleted, but it's in the same space. So that's where we got his diagnosis while he was in intensive care. As Charlotte said, that's where our journey then began.
And Frank?
Mine is, I suppose, slightly shorter term, but it's good timing because we've just had a consultants meeting. And my daughter appeared to be fairly sort of normal. She'll love me for reminding her of that later on when she's older, at birth. But about 2.5 months in, we had our routine consultation, and it appeared she hadn't gained any weight. They then identified a 9 mil ventricular septal defect in her heart, and it was presented very much as you have no choice here but open heart surgery, and we need to get her weight up to around 6 kilos, and what you need to now do is just effectively force feed her until her weight is up so that we can then perform the open heart surgery, but there's no guarantee on timings because of just demand and supply. And we found ourselves from that point on sort of in and out of hospital. She became a sufferer of sort of very chronic breathing issues. And when she wasn't gaining weight, they put her onto a nasogastral tube. So gastronasal. Nasogastro. I always forget which way around it is. It's funny how these things sort of go, isn't it? They sort of, it's in your head for your life, and then you forget. And it's one way around it. It's an NG tube, a nasogastric tube. And so we found ourselves in a routine of just force feeding her high calorie milk every hour and a half, every 2 hours, day, nights, in and out of hospital, working in and out of hospital. And we got a cancellation on the surgery. So we were down to Southampton in late January 2024, and there for 2 weeks whilst they operated on her. And of course, it's not over at that point. She then still suffered from bouts of bacterial or viral infections and chest infections that caused her to go back in repeatedly for more monitoring. But she seems to be largely out of the woods at the moment. But yes, there was a very intensive spell of about a year, I think, sort of running from birth through to her last major hospitalisation with the surgery in the middle of it.
Thank you all. And so coming to sort of the central theme, would anyone like to jump in with some of the adaptations they've had to make, particularly on the professional life, as to balance the additional needs of the child with the need to work and to earn an income?
I'll jump in. I think I've been very lucky in that I am a barrister, so I'm self-employed, and so I get a certain amount of control over what I do and don't do. It's only a certain amount of control. Obviously, I have clients who need me to do things, but that I think helped at the outset that I was able to, or had to, I think, limit sometimes the amount of work that I was able to take on, particularly when my daughter was very young and there were just a huge amount of appointments that we had to attend all of the time. And I am lucky in that I have a certain amount of control over my own diary from that perspective. But it has, I think, limited the amount of that I've been able to take on sometimes, and that's difficult. I think one of the other things that I've had to learn to do, and that hasn't come naturally to me, is to be a bit more open about it, because I've had to, sometimes arranging childcare. We have great childcare, but it's when that doesn't work out, the sort of backup plans are more limited. We can't just send her to a friend's house, and so sometimes that has meant, I can't make a call at this time or whatever it might be. So I've had to make sure that people are aware of my situation sometimes, which is difficult and doesn't always come naturally to me, because I don't want people to think that I'm not capable of doing things. And, I want people to understand that sometimes I can't work at those hours because I'm having to go to a hospital appointment, but I'll happily do it in the evening. And I think, being a bit more open about that has been helpful. I think one of the challenging things with my job is that I have a lot of flexibility, and that's great, and I can work from home and that makes things easier. But when I have to be in court, I have to be in court, and there's no backup person, and that can be quite difficult. So I've had to make sure I have plans and backup plans for the backup plans in place, to try and avoid any disasters there. And so far that has worked out well, but it's quite stressful, to put it mildly.
I think I would echo what Charlotte says, that the early days for us were the worst. William was in and out of hospital at best every 3 weeks, and blue lighted into high dependency, and at worst way more frequently. So it was traumatic as well. So it comes with that level of complex trauma that you do learn to live with it as background trauma. But I think in the early days I also overshared probably, and I think for most parents it's terrifying to think that this could happen to them. So oversharing is something I've had to learn to rein in, versus going the other way completely and then not sharing anything. So people wonder why you're not in the office, or wonder why you're not able to attend certain meetings. So it's trying to find a balance, and those early days were super, super hard for us. We're quite lucky again that we've got a good support network, and I think that's really, really key.
Yeah, just following on from Emma's point there about people's expectations. I've got a very, very vivid, almost scarring memory of trying to chair meetings with creditors, investors on some of our fraud cases at the MacDonald Hospital down in Southampton, which was provided for people who were there with children in sort of paediatric intensive care. And there was a degree of disbelief and skepticism which came through from some of the people I might be speaking with as to whether or not this was a legitimate reason or a real grounds for me to be not as available as I would be normally at that point in time. And it was a real lesson in how to remain entirely sort of cold and composed in those scenarios when people really are not quite understanding the things which are quite critical to your life.
I think I do have memories, or one or both of you, Andy, Frank, of having such meetings from waiting rooms at hospitals, and we're talking on video and then jumping on to meetings because there's a quiet bit, no idea what's going to go on, so you carry on fitting it in, I suppose. That was quite an experience.
Yesterday, when I was at the consultants meeting over in Oxford, the kids were playing in the quad, and we were sat there, and I was pointing at all the windows I'd looked out at over the course of different overnight spells in the hospitals. Hey, I've slept there, and I've slept there, and I've slept there, and it was an interesting sort of flashback to the amount of time spent trying to create an office within a room which is full of beeping hospital machinery and people coming in and out at all hours of day and night, sort of to take observations.
One of your recollections there, Steve, I think would be you and I had a committee meeting which we attended virtually from a side room of Great Ormond Street Hospital's paediatric intensive care unit. I think that was the last time William was intubated and on life support, which is a shade under 3 years to the day since that day. So yeah, you do find yourself doing these things in odd places. Emma?
I think it's definitely a balance of that vulnerability, because as Charlotte said again, you don't want people to think that you're incapable of delivering, and certainly with my role, it's male-dominated environment. A lot of people don't necessarily understand juggling as a working mother, how we can do it. So you've got groups of people that don't have children, whether they're for whatever reason not had children, or they're younger so they haven't had them yet. And then you've got groups of people that have got children, and to all of them it's incomprehensible sometimes the situations that we've been through and how you juggle that mentally, emotionally, and then to be able to still deliver at work. So it is definitely that fine balance of sharing and not sharing. But as Charlotte said, I think the vulnerability is also important, because people need to see that we're not inhuman. We still have feelings about this, and it does affect us on a day-to-day basis still. It does just become a new background level of normal.
I think also I've found that when I've opened up about it a bit, other people have come to talk to me with their issues as well. Somebody whose child was on the pathway to being diagnosed with autism came and spoke to me about their situation. I've connected with other people who've got other caring responsibilities, not children necessarily with additional needs, but ill spouses or elderly parents. And so lots of people have their own challenges, and it's a shame, I think, for us all to go through those separately and think that we're all alone in it. So I think it's important, but I agree completely, Emma. You have to work out where the right spaces are to share those things, because sometimes you just want people to think that you're just focused on your work and that's it, and you don't have any other things going on. It's a tricky balance, I think.
And I think I'm privileged enough at work that I've been empowered and enabled to set up what we call a network. So I set up the Differently Abled Carers and Parents Network, and for a previous company, those networks were separate. And I found when I went back after William was born, I'd go to the carers network for support, and they'd send me to the parents network. I'd go to the parents network, and they're like, "Oh, that's a carer's position." So I was honoured and privileged to set that up for Sizewell, and that will continue. I'm not the chair anymore. I chaired it for a couple of years, but as you say, Charlotte, that support, and I mentioned it earlier, the support networks is so important. So whether you find that in your family, whether you find it in your friends, whether you can find it at work, having people that you can empathise with and that can empathise with you, but also then feeling like you're not alone and you can support other people is absolutely key and rewarding. But also it's important for your own mental health to find that safe space where you can talk about things and you can go and look for support or support others in return.
One of my observations of going through this path is it often feels to me like there's sort of 3 phases or categories or stages of which William and his needs will be. There's the hugely critical and acute health needs times when, as Emma said, we went through a period of 3 years, I think, where we were in a blue lighted ambulance every 3 to 4 weeks for his seizures, and it was always an overnight stay. And generally it got to the point where on our familial WhatsApp chat group, all that would happen is someone, be it my parents or Emma or I, whoever was with William, would just write seizure, and immediately all the plans went into action straight away. Generally, Emma would go off with William in the ambulance. I'd come home. I'd immediately go through the checklist of everything we need to stay over the night in hospital. My mum and dad would then also help out with sorting out the house, and then we would roll through all of that. There's then also the times when there's significant but not so pressing healthcare issues where you're having quite a lot of sort of almost a follow-up after you have the acute instances. And the third one is where the health is broadly under control, but particularly with William and probably Charlotte for your daughter, but there are also behavioural, well, it'll be the same actually for Frank and your daughter. There are also then behavioural or support issues or the maintenance of the health side that still has to go on. You still have those quite frequent appointments with hospitals. I mean, we had one Monday this week with the Gosh neurologist for William, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's an appointment next week and one the week after. But that, you just have to go through those. Has anyone found that there's a change in how either you feel you have to approach any adaptations or how those you work with or for sort of react to you depending on the phase? Just to give a quick guidance of where I come from, I think almost no one that you interact with is going to be too harsh or critical of you when you are in the point of view, I'm really sorry, my child is in an ambulance on their way to hospital. People don't get too angry at that stage. Do you find there's a difference depending on the phase? Emma?
I think yes, absolutely. I think it's easy for people to, as you say, focus on the acute situation and then be like, when you're coming back to work, or they don't say it. I mean, I'm really lucky and blessed where I am, but it's how it makes you feel. So you put this own perception yourself that other people must be thinking that because I feel guilty. So maybe it's not an outsider view, but you feel like it's there and you feel like you have to justify what you are doing. And it's the same with the day-to-day stuff. Obviously, that's mundane. So, and it's there for life, isn't it? So I guess it's that it comes back to that being open and honest with people and saying, look, I will be flexible and I will work and I'll make the hours up and I'll do whatever I need to do to get the work done. Actually, there are some times when I absolutely can't be there because, for example, there's an EHCP meeting, which is a legal meeting. It's not set by the parents. It happens with or without you. And it's imperative, really, from our perspective, we're there to get the right support. So I think it all comes back to communication at the end of the day.
I think from my perspective, that when you're in the sort of maintenance phase, when things are sort of roughly going all right, you're just doing your routine appointments, you've got things like your EHCP meetings, that's become so normal to me now that I don't realise that other people aren't dealing with all of that. And then I think, why am I struggling to do all of this? And then, someone will remind me that actually I've got quite a lot on my plate and you can't be in 2 places at once. So and then I think, maybe I should be getting a bit more support. And it's annoying. Why aren't they helping me? But actually it's because I've got so used to it that I don't reach out and say, actually, I've got to go to this meeting. Or I just try and make it work. So I think there's probably some lessons there for me in terms of how I'm dealing with it. But it's difficult because you don't know any different, really, once you've been living it for a long time.
I have a chronic issue, which is I overpromise and underdeliver sometimes. Everyone on this call will agree, I have no doubt. And one of the issues there is I would frequently plan, particularly if I knew I was going to be overnighting in hospital, I would plan on the idea that I'd be able to get work done whilst I was in hospital. even though that was the most ludicrous and irrational thing to try and promise people that I would do, because it would be entirely contingent on having a room. Whether we were in a room or on a ward would make a massive difference. Whether there was a desk or not would make a massive difference. Whether there were, oxygen monitors that were going to be beeping repeatedly at you would make a massive difference as to whether you could focus and concentrate. So there was a degree of managing other people's expectations, which was quite key, but also managing my own expectations, particularly when busy, on the ability to deliver and sort of meet my own expectations and colleagues' expectations within the office, which I think was, in hindsight, unrealistic, very unrealistic.
I was just going to say to Charlotte, one of the jokes behind the title Dodging Bullets is the notion that if there's enough bullets whistling by, they become background music. They're just the noise. So in our busy jobs, we just learn to cope and adapt. So yes, the concept of, I knew Andy and Emma before they had William, and I've seen them afterwards, and how two very intelligent people just adapt into the day. They cope with the issues, and it becomes normality. And then you move on. There's no choice. You've got to move on.
Yeah. And I think on the other hand, sort of work can be crazy. And we've adapted to that we're all sort of having to meet ridiculous deadlines all of the time, that we need to be available 24/7. So we have that on the one hand, so we've got all of those bullets coming at us, and then all of the other ones, but you just get on with it, I suppose.
Charlotte, do you find the courts or the judges give you any leeway? Do they even know, or do you have any circumstance where you might invoke that?
I have one example of that, and I had a hearing, and I had a relatively minor part in it, but I was going to have to leave by 5. And normally court finishes at 4:30, so it should have been fine. But the hearing was going on, and I had to go. And so my clerk contacted the judge's clerk, who got a message to the judge and was absolutely fine about it. And in fact was sort of quite apologetic that it had gone on without checking that anybody was okay. I think now I'm quite a bit more senior now. Now I would have probably raised it myself, but I was more junior then and worried about doing so. So the judge was very understanding, and I would hope maybe thought again about whether it's all right to just carry on beyond the hours that you're expecting to without checking it with the people involved. And because people might have other reasons, that's not necessarily just connected to a child with additional needs. But that's the only time that I've had to raise it with the court. It's sort of generally you can manage these things in advance with court deadlines, so it's doable.
Some of our sites that I've been on in the past, you can't have a mobile phone. So I've had to put additional arrangements in place with the security and make arrangements back at home with yourself, Andy, or with your mum, to, if that call comes, if that word seizure, as you said, we would put in the group chat, how do you get hold of me? How do I know that I need to leave site? So I've had to have specific arrangements in place to make sure that you can get hold of me if something happens. It's quite a challenge sometimes, I guess.
I do just want to go back to one word that you said a little while ago, Emma, which was guilt and guilty, and sort of feelings of guilt. And I wonder how common that is with regards to, guilt of leaving the job or not being thought of pulling weight. Emma, do you want to expand more?
Yeah, so I actually remember even before I think we had William, I was on a leadership course at work, and one of our senior directors came in to do a chat, and she's female, and she was talking about being a working mum, and she said basically, as if you accept as a group of females, if you have children, that you're always going to feel guilty. You're always going to feel like you're either letting work down or home down. If you're juggling a work-life balance, then that will be a good grounding for you. And it resonated with me because I do struggle with feelings of guilt. I struggle with feelings of guilt that William has got this condition in the first place, even though I know all the science. As a scientist and engineer, I understand all of that. So I absolutely understand the mechanism, and it's not my fault, but it doesn't take away the illogical part and the irrational part of how you feel. So I think, yeah, guilt is a big thing. So when you add that complexity on top, it's always going to be there. And then also we've not spoke about other children too. So I think all of us on the call have got other children. And so the impact on them is so important to understand. Then you feel guilty because you've got to dedicate your time to your child that's got disabilities, or you're not doing enough to be with your partner, or you're not doing enough at work. So there's so many plates spinning that sometimes it's really hard to focus on the rational, logical thought and not go straight into the illogical part of guilt and feeling like you're letting everyone down.
It's so interesting hearing someone else talk about it, because I have all of those feelings. Every day feels like another opportunity to not do things well enough and to let people down at work or at home, or my other children, like you say, Emma. But when I listen to someone else say it out loud, I think that's ridiculous, because you're incredible. And look what an incredible role model you are, juggling work, being so successful there, raising William, raising your other child. Like, nobody should feel less guilty. You're just doing so much, but you can't, when you apply it to yourself, see that, because you want to do the best you can in all of these areas, don't you? And it's hard, but I think the reality is that, you know, nobody is doing everything perfectly all of the time, even without all of these additional things to deal with.
Well, as the sort of spare wheel or employer on this podcast, and someone who doesn't really understand the concept of feeling guilty about anything, I say what I think and then to face the consequences afterwards. But no, I don't have a worry gene, so that's also a thing. So what I would really say on that is I don't know what the reciprocal part of feeling guilty would be, but from my perspective, I wouldn't say you had anything to be guilty about. So if that makes sense, so I think the only thing I would add is that's an entirely internal emotion. But it shouldn't be something that if it's driven by a feeling that someone outside is being improperly affected. Speaking for myself, it wouldn't even occur to me that you'd think that.
I would say the one of the things I found in a professional context was it gave me an incredible sense of perspective in terms of things which mattered and which were critical, and things which weren't matter or didn't matter and which were not as critical as I might have otherwise considered them beforehand. And it's not a great way to learn that lesson. And certainly when it happens and it takes up every waking moment for you and your family, it's there. But you do sort of come away from it sort of having a better understanding that, well, not only you, but then again for everyone else in their lives, people will be battered by all sorts of conflicting priorities and concerns, which are frequently far more important than anything you might expect out of them. And so, if anything, it also sort of confers a greater degree of empathy for people who are going through other difficult situations. And I often remember, because Andy and I used to sit opposite each other back when we had an office, it's one of those things where I always felt if this had all been happening when we'd been in that situation, I suspect there would have been quite a lot of discussion about the respective effects of situations on us. And it's certainly from other people within the industry, it's prompted a lot of conversations where similar things have come out, and it's a way of sharing, how do you deal with it? How does it affect you? What are the coping mechanisms, which everyone has?
I think for me, the early days, if I look back, I don't know if I got to the empathy part quite that quickly. I think for me, I found it personally quite the struggle to start with, to understand or rationalise why other people were still worried about these seemingly innocuous issues, because don't they understand that life is so different and there's more to life? So I definitely went through a journey where I then did get to the empathy part, absolutely, obviously. But yeah, I do remember some days I lost interest in things like, I've always enjoyed going to Wimbledon, and I found myself going to one and like wandering around and wondering why everyone was still participating in this, and why was I doing it? Whereas actually I could just be at home focusing on what was more important. It's definitely a journey.
I mean, from my experience, I've got 3 kids. They've all had their medical moments over the years, but in my cases, it was essentially all clears or nothing to worry about and things like that. So I can see, toss of a coin, the sort of sliding doors moment with you guys. But it occurs to me, of course, you've all got other kids, so you've got a benchmark against which you can see the conventional problems, things that everybody else has and I would have, and things like that as well. So you've got that as well. How do their siblings deal with these issues?
Yes, I've got twins. So with one has the genetic condition and the other doesn't. So you can't get away from the comparison. And that was quite difficult particularly when they were very young, sort of seeing Verity meet her milestones whilst Alice wasn't. But since they've grown up a bit more, they've been so great for each other. I think that Alice has really been spurred on by seeing what Verity can do. And, there's nothing like your sister stealing your toys to motivate you to get up and get them back. And I think that Verity and her younger sister, Estella, have learned so much from watching Alice be so resilient and determined, and just being involved now in the world of disability, which we otherwise wouldn't have probably been exposed to at all. I think, I hope it's going to make them really rounded and kind individuals. They're kids. They fight with their siblings, obviously, but I think we've all learned a lot from it. One of the difficult things, I think, is making sure you give them all enough attention and time, and that's something that I am very conscious of. But it can be difficult. But overall, I think everyone brings a lot to the table, and they're really great for each other.
I think for us, Eli, the youngest son, struggles a little bit, but he is younger and he is still only 6. He's definitely a more empathetic human than I think otherwise he would have been. He definitely was the best thing that could have happened to William. And it's obviously, as you said, Charlotte, they're brothers, they still fight. It's a challenge. William has challenging behaviours because he's non-verbal. So I think that's probably one of the biggest struggles for Eli is, and certainly as he's been growing up, that he gets told off if he does something, and William doesn't always necessarily get told off in the same way because there's a different limitation and a different understanding. But I think also for us as parents, having a child with a disability, it's definitely changed me as a person, and it's changed me as a mum, it's changed me as a wife, it's changed how I do things and how I operate at work. People say to me, how do you juggle it all? And I just say, good project manager, what can I say? But being trite, William's taught me to manage that better. So therefore, then I overanalyze that maybe with the siblings and try to manage that a little bit, whereas perhaps sometimes I should just sit back and say, do you know what, they're still siblings. If they're going to fight, let them fight.
There was a point in December 2023, which would have been my son Kit's 3rd birthday, and his birthday came and went. We were in hospital. I think he had a card. He probably had a present if I cast my mind back. He didn't care. We agonised about it. We agonised about the fact that he was missing out on a birthday, but he didn't care. He bounced back. He was resilient. His trips to hospital consisted of him running around a little bit more than he should have done and being fascinated by big beeping machines. And then what we discovered was he could be very caring about his younger sister's condition and very frustrated with us, but he would always sort of bounce back a little bit. And I think that it did force us to make sure that we balanced more time with him, but we kind of marvelled at his resilience at being ignored and passed backwards and forwards to other family members, and then occasionally being taken into hospital. And when we went in for the consultation yesterday, he sort of actively wanted to have all of the same tests done to him. So he wanted to be hooked up to the machine to see what his heart looked like in 3D, just for fun. So I'm genuinely hoping this moves him into a career in the medical profession, as opposed to anything which I might be doing.
I think it's quite interesting listening to you talk about that. Andrew and I maybe shielded Eli a bit from some of it, and he has struggled with anxiety for sure. It was only a recent reflection where we noticed that if we were going up to Great Ormond Street, that Eli would get particularly anxious at school. He'd have some problems and behavioural issues. And then I sat and thought about it and realised that actually the last time he did go to an appointment, and the reason we started shielding him was because William was on life support, as you mentioned, Andrew. back a few years ago, and we didn't think he was going to make it. So we had to make the decision to take him in and prepare him for the worst. And that was probably the last time and the last experience that he had. Now, he was very young, but you don't know what trauma comes from that. So we've shielded him, but then we found that actually, I think his imagination was getting the worst of him. So you've described it a few times, Andrew, where we took William in for a blood test, and Eli was really, really stressed about it. He was really anxious. You could see he was really tense. He ran around the room and made William laugh, which made it a much better experience for William. And then afterwards, Eli said, "Is that it? I thought there'd be more blood." And I think, we think he thought they were going to just sort of nick his arm and spray blood everywhere and catch the blood rather than just do a blood test, as we know how they do it. So, yeah, I think sometimes it's really interesting to hear that the balance of you can shield, but it can cause different problems because the imagination is worse than the reality.
Well, speaking of balance, Steve, you are our resident employer for this episode. How have you sort of seen it and approached dealing with when your staff, two of which are here, have the children with additional needs, and how that plays into their work responsibilities?
I mean, two things. Firstly, they don't let me talk about HR in the office. It's not my field for understandable reasons. And also, I thought there's a danger of you painting me as a kindly employer. I think in reality, particularly, I suppose you've got to look at it. I knew you before, and in your case, sort of, William's born. There's pictures on your computer and chatting things like that, and then things slowly emerged. I think so. There's a sort of conditioning bit, and I'm a parent too, and I think as an employee, your first thing is, well, it could happen to me. So I don't think there's anything strange about how an employer would react. It's also quite useful on this call. I was thinking about it. We've got a self-employed person, we've got a small professional firm, and we've got a very large employer out of the sort of three choices here. We all react in different ways. A big company will have a policy and a system, and it needs driving. And in our firm, you're talking directly to the partners. It's a partner's choice. It's my money. I can do with it what I like, sort of type thing. And Charlotte's got her own choices to make about their own balances. So from those experiences as an employer, you do the human thing first, I would have thought. If you're in a firm that wouldn't react that way, you probably wouldn't be wanting to work for them anyway. So it didn't seem to me to be too difficult a choice. I think the difficulties come for an employer in a whole realm of circumstances where someone has something special and they abuse it. It's they become hardly ever there or something else. There are people who would take a very slight thing and then exaggerate it so they can do as little as possible. There are those people out there, but mostly when you know the people, and particularly when it's involving kids and everything else, the natural thing is to help out. What can I do? And sometimes that's sort of just word said because there's nothing you can do. Other times you can make changes to pressures and stuff. I mean, Andy's probably our brightest employee. He's nearly as smart as me. He's certainly second place in geeks to me, I think, no matter how hard he tries, although we do geek out from time to time. But it's very difficult for Andy, certainly in the past, to be sort of in a position where lots of staff are relying on him to be in that day for a particular thing. It's sort of slightly similar to Charlotte, where there could be a court case and things like that, and everyone's looking to you, and then you can't turn up for a reason. One of the practical issues we had to look at was, can Andy have lots of staff under him who are relying on him, and suddenly Andy has to disappear for a week to gosh. And that's something we can revisit and adapt. But it's a package, isn't it? I mean, getting obsessed with the amount of hours or amount of anything is just the inhuman approach. I think you just deal with the problem as if it was your child. How you treat others as you'd want to be treated yourself.
Thank you, not least for the compliments.
That wasn't intentional. I'm sorry. Can we edit that out later?
I have a couple more questions before we wrap this up. One of which is, we've talked a lot about the sort of professional and the working side. How does that interact with and impact on also the home and the family side? Emma, how good am I?
That's a really unfair leading question, Andrew. At least I'm not sat at home in the other office. Yeah, there has to be a change. There has to be a shift between you. I was lucky enough to have you, and for you to want to be involved, and for you even before we knew about the challenges that William would have, you wanted to have some of the maternity leave at the end. So we already had a plan for that. And I think that changes a perception of how you deal with things. So I think, yeah, there's definitely an element of the invisible workload that people carry. And we've had many conversations in the past around who is best placed to do what in the home, with organising appointments or planning things, or whether it be taking the rubbish out or doing practical tasks. So we've basically had to come to discussions and agreements of who's going to do what, so that we're both sharing the load, so the mental load, the physical load, and then also being honest with each other around burnout and how we feel, because the statistics for people that have children with additional needs or disabilities is actually quite high for divorce. So we, in the early days, certainly deployed an opportunity with the hospice to have some support from a counsellor there, not because our relationship was bad, but because we knew the statistics and we wanted to work through it together before it got to that point. So I think we've been privileged enough that we've both wanted to put the effort in for each other and for our family. And as a consequence of that, we've done all of the hard work, the conversations and sharing the load.
Charlotte, want to add?
I think it just really brings home how much of a team effort all of this is. And that might be your partner at home, it might be your wider family, your friends. You just, I think this is the case with having children generally, but it's just exacerbated where you've got more to deal with. But sort of you really need everybody to pitch in as much as they can and share the responsibilities. And that makes life just so much easier if that's what you're doing.
The phrase that it takes a village to raise a child means so much more and has so much more applicability, I think, in these sorts of scenarios.
It needs a town
Emma?
or a city.
The friends actually are really important. So Charlotte, I met you because of your daughter being born with her condition, and you reached out to Andrew, and then we met up, and we've continued to meet up ever since. So I think our paths probably wouldn't have crossed before. So I think we've talked quite a lot about the troubles and the challenges of having children with additional needs, but actually there are some positive sides. As I said earlier, I feel like I'm a better person for it, but I've also met some amazing people. I've met Charlotte, I've got a good friend out of it for life that understands not just having a child with additional needs, but also the challenges of being a working mum. Some statistics there, I can't remember, I think it was Sense a few years ago, only 3% of mums work anyway, of children with additional needs, and only 1% work full time. So I think it's really, really important that you build those networks. And actually, I would probably throw a question back to Frank and to yourself, Andrew, of how does it impact you as dads? Because no disrespect, it's not a gender thing here, but we know that it's a fact that men find it harder to talk. So how does that work for guys?
Well, I'll step in. It's neatly sort of gone around the point that I was going to raise about home working, but it's relevant. So from our point of view, certainly from my point of view, I think I always felt like I was going to be very heavily involved, but I've always been very acutely aware that the timing of the children, both Pippa being unwell and also Kit before, has overlapped with the pandemic and home working. And I have this sort of, Steve used the phrase sliding doors moment, and I have this sort of this sense of what would life have been like if we hadn't been able to work from home? What would looking after Pippa have been like if we hadn't been able to look after her from home and hadn't had the flexibility? I mean, my wife is a civil servant, fairly senior in her role, but it affords her the flexibility to work from home at least 3 days a week. So that allows us to share the responsibility a lot more and allows us to sort of monitor our own mental health a lot more as well. And that means that we can sort of balance the load as much as we possibly can. And to a degree, I think because of the work that I do and the way that I do it, it allowed me probably greater flexibility from working from the hospital during the crunch points, because I could do more. I could deal with calls, but I could deal with document sort of preparation and research, and general work and drafting, all the sort of the more mundane aspects of a day-to-day job, which then allowed me to say, well, for the sake of this, let me prioritise being in hospital a little bit more here, because then that eases up the load there, and we can sort of constantly deal with that. But I can't imagine what it would have been like if we hadn't been working remotely. I think that would have created a lot of strain, and it probably would have put more of the onus on her to have worked less, which is a terrible thing, and I don't particularly like it, but it's probably because we would have viewed the civil service as being a more flexible employer who would be more accommodating for her to go down to a sort of 0.6, and we would have then been able to work around it. So we would have had a whole load of very different practical considerations in that. But the ability to remote work, which not everyone has, made things easier for us.
Yeah, I've pondered this a few times as to how we would have carried on, because William's worst health time was before the pandemic, but the first lockdown in March 2020, which 6 years ago, which feels it doesn't feel that long ago, that was just as Emma was coming off of mat leave for Eli. So it was just as we were coming to the point of having 2 children. And also, for example, now we have the more mundane problems that William goes to a special school, Eli goes to the local mainstream school. So balancing getting the kids off and all of those things. To give perhaps the other side of what Emma said for our home life, I think we've, whether by chance or by design, we have fallen into complementary roles where I don't think Emma would mind if I said that Emma is very much the one that makes sure we have a plan as to a knowledge of what's happening next week, in the next few days, in the next year. Whereas I will far more just make sure that we get through the next hour, and I will run around the house in the morning trying to get all the children ready in the next hour, while Emma's thinking, right, what do we need for Thursday? What are we going to do next week? And all of those sorts of things. And that's where it has helped. We had the counselling. We made that conscious effort because we looked at the stats and we didn't want to become one of those stats if we could avoid it. And I think it was very useful. It was more for the tools. At the time, there weren't particularly any issues. And it was a way for us to sit down, and the main skill was to be able to, and we do this now occasionally, is to create a safe space where we can both bring whatever our problems are into that space and discuss them without having immediate antagonistic responses. Because for so many of the things that will bother you in a relationship, they're not enough for you to want to say, look, we need to sit down and discuss this. And so the only time you raise it is when you're both tired, frustrated, and you get into an argument, and they are deployed as support for why you were wrong and the other person's rubbish, and they're not pulling their weight whilst you're doing everything. You are Atlas, carrying the world on your shoulders, and you will never get anything constructive out of that. And so with regards to talking, I've opened up, I think, more in recent times with William's story, possibly with the fundraising and the catchphrase, almost the motto of "Be More William," because William used to go in for these horrific seizures and would always need at least 2 or 3 bouts of life-saving anti-epilepsy drugs in the hospital in resus before we'd get them under control, save for the times when we didn't and he was off to intensive care. And the next day, I always remember when he was younger, the next day I'd have to sit him facing the nurse's station so that I could give him breakfast and he could look out of the door of the bay. And every time a nurse walked past, be it male or female, he would shout at them, "Ah!" And they would turn and he would beam this smile at them. So they would come in, say hello and make a fuss. And almost as they were walking out, as the next one walked past, he would shout at that one and would just smile at them. No signs of everything that had happened. And so that was, and so telling that story is sort of more inspiring now. Steve?
Let's end on a slightly different note. How's your normal life? Hobbies? You're doing fundraising, things. What are you doing other than dealing with this?
Go on, Emma.
So both Andrew and I were runners way before children were born, and as Andrew said, we've picked up a charity, set up the charity Boomer William. I use that not just as a mechanism to help support us with some of the things that we need to buy that you can't get on the NHS, but also as an awareness platform, as it were. So I've been running the world. Can we call it that? I'm privileged enough to have Andrew, so I've been able to disappear off and go and run a marathon. And I've been doing the Abbott's World Major series, so I've currently done all 7, which are in the series, and I still use that as a platform. I got interviewed at the end of Sydney Marathon purely by chance, a 7-minute live stream, and they didn't cut any of it either, which is amazing, really. So it's that opportunity to get your story out, and then every time you mention it, one more person in the world has heard about Angelman syndrome, one more person's heard about epilepsy and the kind of amazing things that our children still do in spite of all the challenges that they do have.
You got to list the cities. You didn't list the cities. Come on, give us the list.
In order, I did New York, London, Berlin, Chicago. Testing me now. Chicago, Tokyo, Boston, and then they added Sydney. So Sydney was the last one, and then there are 2 more candidate races in the offing. So if they pass their candidacies this year, then next year I'll be off to Cape Town and Shanghai to get the new 9-star medal. But obviously that's subject to them passing. So
congratulations, Charlotte.
That's so impressive. I first got to know Emma when we were both doing the London Marathon, actually. She did the day after Alice's first birthday to raise money for the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association. But that is the one and only marathon that I have done, or I think will ever do. But I do get out and do the park run, do a 5K every now and again, which is, I think, good for me. And yeah, going to the gym, read a lot. I think that's a bit of escapism. Just going out and seeing my friends, I think, is really good for me. Doing those normal things, I think it's really important to make sure that you have time for yourself where you just get to be you and not a carer. And I think that sort of charges up your battery so you can go and keep doing it. I think I know it's a cliche, but they say, you can't pour from an empty cup, and I think that's really important to remember. But probably no more marathons.
I was going to say, let's do Andy next, because we can peak with Frank, because I'm sure Frank's going to outdo everybody. He's just sitting there trying to think and make up a hobby. No, Andy, what's beat them all?
I have 2 main hobbies outside of work. The first, which I don't think Steve is referring to, is I still enjoy playing the piano and still have lessons and butcher works of famous composers. And I do run. Running is how Emma and I originally met all those years ago. And whereas Emma's gone to try and go around the world with her running, I think because I was already doing marathons before I joined Griffins, and within a year of joining Griffins or so, that's just after a year, we ran from Paris to London. So in raising money, I feel like I have to push the boat out further. So a couple of years ago, we started doing the hundreds of miles for hundreds of smiles challenges, where I went up to 100 miles, 200 kilometers, which is 124 miles. And then last year, and I'm repeating this year, doing the Thames Ring 250, which is a 256 mile run along the Thames, sort of from Reading into London, up the Grand Union Canal, just past Northampton, onto the Oxford Canal, back to Oxford, and then from Oxford back to just outside Reading, which last time took me 87.5 hours. And this time I'm going to see if I can't push it under 80 hours. And for those that care, there will no doubt on LinkedIn nearer the time, it's towards the end of April, there'll be a link where you can dot watch for 3.5 days as I slowly wind my way along waterways. But it's very useful because it's space in my head that's open and empty, and I can just let all the worries pour away while I'm running.
I met you during the 250, and you were in various states of dishevelment and incoherence. And I think I know you've got a couple of stats. One of them, I can't remember the stats for the actual race. How many? Given that it was about 40 people who'd all pretty much experienced it, and how few people actually finished that race?
There was a greater than 75% failure rate on the race. Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
I think you said there's been more people on the space station, isn't there?
More people have visited the space station than have finished that race. Yeah. So I think of individual finishers, I'm only the 126th person to finish it, and it started in 2009.
Wow. And Frank?
Well, I don't know what you think I'm going to talk about, Steve, but I'm actually going to turn to my wife, Charlie. She's another Charlotte, and I'm actually going to sort of point very much to Charlotte's own comments, because Charlie has just done her second ultra marathon up around Stoner Park, and is gearing up for the 100k in around Chesham. And for her, being able to get back out and find that kind of clarity of thoughts out running, and the physical exercise, the ability to create a space for yourself, which is a long way away from all of the other duties and responsibilities and activities that all involve the children with their different needs, was such an important thing. And it was something that was definitely missing when we were in and out of hospital all the time. I mean, I think we managed to go running in Southampton. I saw bits of Southampton I didn't know existed and didn't want to know existed at that point. And it was really good. And she sort of refound that as the way of finding balance. I mean, for myself, Steve could have been referencing me whittling a bow with a machete for World Book Day the other day when Kit went in as Robin Hood. In fact, on that point, Kit, you know that thing where you ask your children what they think you do as a job? So Kit thinks I'm a lumberjack. I was going to say tree surgeon, but I just don't think he thinks I'm that capable. Ask him what he does, and he thinks I cut down trees, and that's because there's a very persistent willow in our back garden. And if I need to clear my head, I go and I stand and I look at it, and I work out which branch I'm going to saw off next.
I also thought I was a train driver because I used to go to the station every day. So that was the logical conclusion. So
anyway, it is possible to find catharsis in the strangest of places, but I do agree physical exercise helps. Yes. And I didn't even have to mention working in the theatre.
Well, I think that's a good point to clock off. Thank you, everyone, for your time and coming in to talk. And I hope everyone's enjoyed it, learnt something, and I hope you join us for the next episode.